Welcome to All Things Storybound, a creative outlet where any and all kinds of stories come to life.
From magical to mythical to mortifying, let us take you on a journey you've never experienced before.
Grab your favorite drink and get comfortable. You're in for a wild story ahead. Chapter 1.
I pulled into the town of Tatum, New Mexico, just after dusk, headlights slicing through the dust-covered road as I slowed to a crawl. On paper, it looked like a typical one-stoplight town in the middle of nowhere. But if my sources were right, something far more sinister was hiding in this sleepy settlement. Skinwalkers. I'd hunted them before, back on the edges of the Navajo Nation mostly. They were shapeshifters, malicious ones, known to take on the form of animals or even other people. The tales were older than most of the towns I'd passed through, and not something the average person believed in. But I did. I parked outside a weather-beaten diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a sickly yellow glow on the sidewalk. I stepped inside, scanning the sparse crowd. Locals mostly, tired-looking men nursing black coffee, a waitress who looked like she'd heard one too many offhand comments, and a few farmers, judging by the mud-caked boots. As I sat down, I noticed a framed newspaper clipping on the wall next to me, yellowed with age. "Cattle mutilations baffle police," it read, dated 20 years ago. Below it, another headline. "Mysterious disappearances in the Sandia Mountains." Similar stories were scattered around New Mexico, each hinting at dark things lurking beyond the glow of porch lights. I wasn't here to solve mysteries, though. I was here to catch a predator. The waitress walked over, barely glancing at me. "What'll it be?" "Coffee, black, and maybe some information." I kept my voice low. "About anything strange that's been happening lately." Her eyes darted to the side, and for a split second, I saw something flash there. Fear, maybe. "Strange how?" she asked, pouring coffee into a cracked porcelain mug. "People seeing things, animals acting up, anything unnatural." She didn't say anything, just set the mug down and walked back to the counter without another word. I'd seen it before. The locals might know something, but they were tight-lipped, especially about creatures they didn't understand. I took a sip of the coffee and waited, watching her carefully. After a few minutes, a man in a dusty flannel shirt slid into the seat across from me. He had the look of someone who had seen things he didn't want to believe.
You're the one asking about the Skinwalker.
He asked in a whisper. His gaze shifted nervously around the room, as if afraid someone else might hear. "That's right," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "You know anything about it?" He nodded slowly, his fingers tapping the table.
People around here, they don't talk about it. But a week ago, my nephew swears he saw it. Something standing on two legs, thin as a skeleton, moving faster than anything he'd seen before. Thing is, it had his voice.
I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Skinwalkers were known for mimicking voices, often the voices of loved ones. A familiar voice in the woods could lead people astray, drawing them back into dark places. Where did he see it?
Up near the Sandia Ridge.
He said.
But you won't catch anyone going up there after dark. The animals won't even go near it. No one wants to be the next one missing.
I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. This was what I was here for. "Thanks for the information. Anything else?" He shook his head, glancing out the window at the darkening sky.
Just be careful, all right? That thing, it's not natural.
The man left, leaving me alone in the flickering light of the diner. I sat for a while, sipping my coffee and listening to the silence settle over the place. My instincts prickled, warning me that this wasn't going to be like the other hunts. Finishing my coffee, I paid the bill and headed back to my car. I'd prepared as much as I could. Silver bullets, ancient symbols, and a few Navajo charms a shaman had blessed for me years ago. They'd saved me once. I'd hoped they'd do it again. As I drove toward the Sandia Ridge, the roads became narrower, winding up the mountain in jagged switchbacks. The world outside the window became a vast sea of blackness, broken only by the occasional pair of animal eyes glowing in the dark. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt. I chalked it up to the adrenaline, the usual jitters that came before a hunt. But this felt different, heavier somehow, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. I reached a clearing and parked, stepping out into the cool night air. The silence was oppressive, pressing in around me like a shroud. I listened, waiting for the usual sounds of the forest. Crickets, a hoot of an owl, something. But there was nothing, only the distant hum of the wind. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, a voice calling my name. The sound drifted from the trees, hollow and warped, as if passing through water. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. It sounded exactly like my brother's voice, though he'd been dead for years. "Come on, just a little further," the voice called again, softer this time, almost pleading. I forced myself to stay calm, reminding myself that this was what skinwalkers did. They lured you in with voices you trusted. I tightened my grip on my pistol, feeling the weight of the silver bullets inside. "Nice trick," I muttered, scanning the tree line. "But you're not getting me that easy." The trees remained still, silent. The voice didn't call out again. I took a few steps forward, watching the shadows stretch and ripple with each step. My flashlight swept over the trees, illuminating nothing but the empty forest. Then, just on the edge of the light, I saw it. A flash of something tall and skeletal, just for a second. It darted out of sight before I could get a good look, leaving behind only the faintest whisper of movement. This wasn't like any skinwalker I'd ever hunted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the cold grip of fear tightening around me. Something out there was watching, and this time, I wasn't sure who was hunting whom.
Chapter 2.
Morning found me still in the woods, huddled in the shell of my truck. I hadn't slept a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark trees, heard that voice calling me deeper into the forest. I'd managed to drive down from the ridge, putting a mile or two between me and whatever I'd glimpsed out there. But I knew I couldn't just leave, not with that thing roaming free. The locals weren't the only ones at risk anymore. I stepped out of the truck, rubbing the stiffness from my neck. In the gray dawn light, the forest looked different, less foreboding, but just as silent. I still hadn't heard a single bird chirp, and that was bad news. The animals knew something I didn't, something I could feel crawling under my skin. This wasn't like any skinwalker I'd dealt with before, and I was starting to wonder if it was something else entirely. As I loaded my pack, I checked my equipment. Silver bullets, polished and ready. Holy water, Navajo protection charms, an iron knife, and enough rations for a couple of days. Whatever this creature was, I wasn't planning on letting it catch me unprepared. I spent the day hiking the trails along the ridge, keeping my distance but watching for signs. Broken branches, footprints, anything out of place. Hours passed, and I found nothing but silence and shadows. No animals, no tracks, just an empty forest that felt like it was watching me. By late afternoon, I was about ready to call it. But then I saw it. Just beyond a patch of dense trees, a shallow ravine cut through the earth, and at the bottom, in the mud, were footprints. But not human. They were huge, maybe twice the size of a man's, and clawed. 4 toes, with each claw longer than my fingers. My heart pounded as I crouched beside them, running my fingers over the impression. Whatever made these prints was big, fast, and heavy. And it had been through here recently, no more than a few hours ahead, if the dampness of the mud was anything to go by. I lifted my head, scanning the surrounding forest. The silence pressed in, heavier than before. For the first time, I felt the distinct sense that I wasn't alone. I was being watched. The footprints led deeper into the woods, where the trees grew denser, gnarled roots twisting out of the earth like bones. I followed, moving as quietly as possible, my hand on my pistol. The trail led me into a thicket of thorn bushes, their branches catching on my clothes as I pushed forward, every rustle feeling like a warning. I came to a stop at a clearing and froze. There, in the center, lay the carcass of a deer. Its body was torn open, innards strewn across the ground in a wide arc. The flesh was shredded, yet no scavengers had touched it. Even the flies were missing. I stepped closer, noticing something strange. The deer's head was twisted backward, almost fully rotated, like something had grabbed it by the neck and wrenched it around. I felt bile rise in my throat. I'd seen grisly scenes before, but this was different, deliberate. Something was playing with its food. A soft crunch sounded behind me. I spun, pistol raised, finger on the trigger. Nothing. My heart raced as I scanned the trees. The sunlight was fading, shadows lengthening across the ground. I couldn't see anything, but the air was thick with a heavy, unspoken tension. It wasn't just that I was being watched. I could feel something moving, slowly circling the edge of the clearing. Another crunch, to my left this time. Closer. I backed toward a tree, pressing my back against the rough bark as I strained to see beyond the shadows. Then, in the fading light, I saw it. Eyes. 2 pinpoints of red glowing from within the trees, watching me. They were high up, almost 7 or 8 feet off the ground, and too far apart to belong to any human. The eyes blinked once, then twice, and in that blink, it was gone. My hands shook as I lowered the pistol, sweat trickling down the back of my neck. The forest was empty again, but the eyes left a scar in my mind, a red afterimage burning in the darkness. I'd been out here long enough to know when I was outmatched. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't like anything I'd hunted before. Skinwalkers had tells, tricks, weaknesses, patterns of behavior I'd studied over years. But this thing felt ancient. Something primal, from the depths of the earth, or maybe from nightmares people used to believe were real. Night fell quickly, too quickly. The stars barely pierced the canopy, leaving me with just a thin beam of flashlight to guide my steps as I retreated toward my truck. I could feel it out there, pacing me, testing my movements. The back of my neck prickled with awareness. I knew it was watching. I picked up my pace, each step sinking into the thick silence, which seemed to grow more oppressive with every minute. I hadn't gone more than a quarter of a mile before I heard it, the faintest scrape of something heavy and clawed moving through the brush behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. It was there, close enough that I could hear its breathing now, a low, guttural sound that seemed to echo in the pit of my stomach. Then came the voice, soft and familiar. "Are you lost?" it whispered, barely louder than a breath. But it was my own voice. I stopped dead, swallowing the panic clawing up my throat. The thing had somehow mimicked me perfectly, down to the slightest intonation. "I know what you are," I called, hoping to sound braver than I felt. "You're just a skinwalker, just a cheap parlor trick in the woods." Silence. Then something shifted in the darkness. I felt it move closer, the ground almost vibrating under its weight. "You know nothing." The voice was low, almost a hiss, and it sounded close, too close. I fired blindly into the darkness, the flash of light from the muzzle illuminating nothing but empty air. No sound followed. No movement. I stumbled back, my legs weak, hands shaking as I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam caught nothing but trees and shadows, my mind racing. It hadn't even flinched, hadn't reacted to the bullet at all. Whatever this was, it wasn't interested in simple scare tactics. I turned and ran, every instinct screaming at me to put as much distance between myself and those glowing eyes as possible. The trees whipped past, the brush tearing at my clothes as I barreled forward, ignoring the branches clawing at my face and arms. I didn't stop running until I saw the faint glint of the truck's metal in the moonlight. My lungs burned as I threw myself into the driver's seat, locking the doors and fumbling with the keys. I turned the ignition and the truck roared to life, headlights cutting into the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw something on the edge of the light. A shape, tall and hunched, with two long limbs and those glowing red eyes fixed on me. Then it slipped back into the shadows, melting into the trees like it had never been there. I drove out of there as fast as I could, heart hammering as I put mile after mile between myself and whatever I'd encountered in the woods. But even as the lights of Tatum came into view, the feeling of being watched didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, like something had marked me, claimed me as prey. And I couldn't shake the words it had spoken. "You know nothing."
Chapter 3.
The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake. A big one. I'd let the thing see me, let it sense my fear. And now, instead of just tracking it, I felt like I was being drawn into something, like a game. But it wasn't just the creature's moves I was trying to understand. It was its purpose. Why was it here? Why now? After a restless night at the town's rundown motel, I returned to the ridge with a new plan. I'd need bait, something to draw it in, something it couldn't resist. Whatever this thing was, it had a taste for the hunt, so I'd give it one, and I'd be ready. I found an old deer trail leading down to a narrow gully where the trees grew thick and close, perfect for trapping a creature of its size. I spent most of the morning setting up snares and tripwires, my hands steady even as my mind raced over every possibility. It was easy to get lost in the methodical work, in the calm of preparing a trap. But no matter how focused I became, I couldn't ignore the prickling sensation that something was watching me from the shadows. By noon, I had everything in place. Silver-threaded tripwires, bells and makeshift alarms to give me a few seconds warning. My rifle was loaded and ready, iron knife within reach. All I had to do was wait. I sat in the hollow of an old tree, watching the silent forest. Hours passed. Shadows lengthened. My ears tuned in to every creak, every whisper of wind through the leaves. The silence was heavy, like a weight pressing down on the whole forest. I knew it was out there, circling, studying me as I was studying it. Just as the sun dipped below the trees, I heard it, the faintest rustle, the barest hint of movement from the far side of the clearing. My fingers tightened on the rifle, my heart thudding in my chest. I held my breath, every nerve on edge as I watched. Then, slowly, it emerged from the shadows. At first, I thought I was looking at a trick of the light. The thing was hunched low to the ground, moving in a way that defied logic. Its limbs were too long, its body twisted and contorted, skin pale as bone, stretched tight over angular muscles and bone. And its face, if you could call it a face, was a nightmare of sunken eyes and sharp, jagged edges. But what chilled me to the core were its eyes. They weren't glowing red like before. No. Now they were black, hollow, as if staring straight through me. And they were full of something I hadn't expected to see. Intelligence. The kind that watches, calculates, waits for the perfect moment to strike. I raised the rifle, aiming for its head. The creature tilted its head, watching me, with something like curiosity. Then, without a sound, it took a step forward, moving so fluidly that it was almost beautiful. I squeezed the trigger, and the shot rang out, shattering the silence. The creature jerked, its body twisting as the bullet tore through its shoulder. But instead of falling, it staggered, let out a low, rattling growl, and then it laughed. The sound was hollow, unnatural, echoing in the clearing as the creature straightened, its eyes fixed on me with something like amusement. Blood seeped from the wound, dark and thick, but it didn't seem to care. If anything, it looked pleased. A chill ran down my spine. I'd heard it, but that only seemed to interest it more. "You came for me," it rasped, its voice a grating whisper that sent a shiver through my bones. "And now you want to run?" It lunged before I could react, faster than anything that size should be able to move. I fired again, the bullet grazing its side, but it didn't slow down. I barely had time to throw myself out of the way as it slashed at the tree where I'd been standing, its claws carving deep gouges into the bark. Scrambling backward, I reached for my knife, feeling the cool weight of the iron handle as I faced the creature. Its black eyes watched me, unblinking, its mouth curling into a twisted smile that showed rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "I thought you were the hunter," it said, tilting its head. "But now you're nothing but prey." I slashed out with the knife, the blade catching its arm, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of pain in its expression. It hissed, retreating a step, but the grin never faded. If anything, it seemed to relish the fight, like it had been waiting for this. "You're no Skinwalker," I spat, circling it warily. "What are you?" The creature chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "Names don't matter, but if you insist, you can call me the End." The End. The words sent a chill through me, resonating with something old and primal. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just here for blood. It was something darker, something that existed to hunt, to stalk, to feed off the fear it instilled in its prey. The thought ignited something inside me, a surge of anger, defiance. I was no stranger to fear, but I'd be damned if I was going to let this thing take me down without a fight. I lunged forward, slashing with the knife, and the creature dodged, moving faster than I could track. It seemed to blur, melting in and out of the shadows, always just out of reach. I swung again, felt the knife bite into flesh, but before I could press the advantage, it twisted, catching me across the shoulder with a swipe that sent me sprawling. Pain shot through my arm as I hit the ground, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I looked up, and there it was, standing over me, those black eyes staring down with a kind of hunger that went beyond physical. This thing wanted more than my life. It wanted my spirit, my defiance, my fear. But I wasn't done yet. Using the last of my strength, I swung the knife, catching it across the leg. It stumbled, hissing, and I used the moment to pull myself up, backing toward the edge of the clearing. My hand fumbled for the small vial of holy water in my pocket, the one I always kept as a last resort. The creature watched me, its expression shifting to something unreadable as I raised the vial. "Think you're clever, do you?" It hissed, its voice low and venomous. "I am older than that, older than the tricks and charms of men." I uncorked the vial, splashing the water across its face. For a moment it shrieked, clawing at its skin as smoke rose from the burn. But then it laughed, a dark, triumphant sound that shook me to my core. "Run, little hunter," it rasped, voice raw and dripping with malice. "Run as far as you can. I will find you. I will always find you." I didn't need any more convincing. I turned and ran, heart pounding as I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could still hear its laughter, echoing through the trees, haunting me. When I finally reached the road, I staggered, breath coming in ragged gasps. My body ached, blood trickling from the wound on my shoulder, but I couldn't stop. I climbed into the truck, slamming the door and fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life and I sped down the mountain, tires skidding on the loose gravel as I put much distance between myself and that thing as possible. The engine roared to life and I sped down the mountain, tires skidding on the loose gravel as I put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. As the town lights came into view, I forced myself to slow down, glancing in the rearview mirror. But there was nothing there, just darkness, stretching back up the mountain. I pulled over by the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my breathing. My body was shaking, muscles taut, adrenaline still pumping through my veins. I'd faced creatures before, skinwalkers, wendigos, things most people only read about in ghost stories. But this was different. For the first time in my life, I felt hunted. And as I sat there, alone in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that it would find me again. And the next time, it wouldn't be interested in playing games.
Chapter 4.
I didn't leave town. The sensible part of me, the part that still valued survival, was screaming at me to drive straight out of Tatum and never look back. But the agent in me knew better. This wasn't a creature I could outrun or ignore. If I left, it would follow. And wherever it caught up to me next, it would be worse. No, I had to end this here. I spent the next day scouring the town, looking for a place where I could lure it, something defensible. There wasn't much, a few abandoned barns on the outskirts, a set of crumbling mines further up the mountain, and an old stone chapel no one had used in years. The chapel had thick walls and only one entrance. It would have to do. By evening, I'd gathered everything I could think of: silver rounds, iron stakes, blessed charms, and another vial of holy water. The sun dipped below the horizon as I made my way up to the chapel, casting long shadows over the dusty ground. I knew I didn't have much time. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the smell of decay and old stone filling my lungs. The wooden pews were mostly rotted, splintered, and broken, but the walls were solid. I set up my traps, looping silver-threaded wire across the doorway, hanging charms and bells in the corners. I poured lines of holy water along the floor, creating a barrier that would at least slow it down. Then I waited. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching out like hours as I sat in the silence, pulse racing. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the old chapel felt like a warning. I gripped my knife tightly, the iron cool against my skin, heart hammering as I replayed my plan over and over in my mind. If I could get it into the chapel, I might have a chance. The sky outside darkened, and I felt it, the shift in the air, the heavy stillness that settled over the world when the creature was near. My muscles tensed, breath catching in my throat as I heard the soft, measured footsteps outside the chapel. It was here. "Come on in," I muttered, more to steady myself than anything else. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" The footsteps stopped. A long silence followed, stretching out until I could barely stand it. Then, slowly, a shadow moved past the doorway, too tall and misshapen to be human. "Do you think you can trap me?" The voice drifted through the chapel, a low, mocking rasp that seemed to seep into the walls. It was my voice again, thrown back at me like some kind of twisted echo. "You've been playing with your food long enough," I replied, forcing the fear out of my voice. "Why don't you come in and finish what you started?" A soft chuckle echoed through the empty space, and then I saw it, standing in the doorway. The creature was larger than I remembered, as if it had grown in the darkness, limbs elongated and twisted, skin stretched tight over sinewy muscle. Its face was blank, eyes black and hollow, as if it were wearing a mask of human skin. "Bold words," it whispered, stepping forward. As soon as it crossed the threshold, the silver wire snapped, slicing through the air and drawing a hiss from the creature as it recoiled, eyes narrowing. I raised the pistol, finger on the trigger. "I may just be a hunter, but I've killed things a lot tougher than you." It watched me, unmoving, unblinking, as if measuring my words. Then, slowly, it grinned, showing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. "Oh, little hunter," it whispered, voice mocking, "you're nothing but prey. The end comes for you all." It lunged, faster than I could react, and I barely managed to fire a shot before it was upon me. The bullet struck its arm, but only seemed to slow it down for a fraction of a second. I stumbled back, heart pounding as it swiped at me, claws raking through the air just inches from my face. I swung the iron knife, feeling the blade connect, slicing into its shoulder. The creature screamed, the sound reverberating through the chapel as it staggered back, black blood oozing from the wound. But it didn't stop. It surged forward, faster and more determined, moving with a fury I hadn't seen before. I threw myself to the side, barely dodging as it crashed into the pews, shattering the wood with its weight. Desperation clawed at me. I'd heard it, but it was barely slowing down. The plan was unraveling faster than I'd prepared for. "Is this the best you can do, Hunter?" it rasped, turning towards me, its black eyes burning with a sick kind of delight. I backed toward the altar, pulling out the second vial of holy water. It saw the glint of the glass and paused, watching me with something almost like curiosity. "You're older than the charms of men, right?" I said, forcing a smirk. "Let's see about that." With a quick motion, I hurled the vial at its chest. The glass shattered, holy water splashing across its skin. The creature shrieked, staggering back as the water burned through its flesh, smoke rising in dark, swirling tendrils. But instead of retreating, it laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that rattled my bones. "Foolish hunter," it sneered, voice dripping with malice. "Do you think pain can stop me? Do you think fear will save you?" I watched, horrified, as it straightened, the burns on its skin already healing, blackened flesh knitting back together before my eyes. "You're wasting your time," it whispered, voice like a death knell. I am not some mindless creature. I am the end of men, the devourer of souls. I am the thing that haunts the hunter. The weight of those words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just some predator or beast. This thing was ancient, something that existed beyond the bounds of life and death, and it had chosen me as its prey. I felt my hand clench around the knife, the cool iron grounding me as I faced it. "You're not taking me without a fight," I said, my voice low, steady. The creature's grin widened, its eyes alight with a sick, twisted pleasure. "Oh, I wouldn't have it any other way," it whispered, moving closer, step by step. I tightened my grip on the knife, bracing myself as it lunged. The next few seconds were a blur of movement, a dance of survival and instinct as I fought to keep it at bay. The knife slashed through the air, catching its flesh again and again, but the creature barely seemed to notice, its laughter echoing through the chapel as it moved faster, more relentless. With one final surge of desperation, I slashed across its neck, the blade biting deep. The creature staggered, hissing as dark blood poured from the wound, its body shuddering. But instead of retreating, it leaned in close, its breath hot against my face, eyes alight with a terrible hunger. "Run, little hunter," it whispered, voice a soft, mocking lullaby. "Run far, run fast, but know that I will always find you, and when I do, there will be nothing left but silence." I stumbled back, dazed, blood pounding in my ears as it melted into the shadows, its laughter lingering in the air like a death sentence. By the time I reached the truck, my body was shaking, heart pounding with a terror I couldn't shake. The creature's words echoed in my mind, a dark promise that would haunt me for as long as I drew breath. Because no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, I knew it would find me. And when it did, the end would come, not with a roar, but with a whisper as silent as the grave.
Chapter 5.
I drove until the gas tank was nearly empty, the world outside blurring into a single line of dark, empty road. The creature's words echoed in my mind, a steady pulse of dread that gnawed at my thoughts no matter how far I went. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it staring back at me, waiting in the shadows. But all I saw was my own face, drawn, haggard, with eyes that didn't look like my own. When I finally stopped, I was miles from Tatum, parked along a gravel road that led to nowhere. The town was far behind, but I knew it wouldn't matter. No amount of distance would keep me safe. Not from this. I killed the engine and sat in the silence, hands clenching the steering wheel as I tried to get my breathing under control. I could feel it out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting, watching. I'd spent my life hunting things like this, things that shouldn't exist. But this creature was different. It wasn't just hunting me. It was toying with me, savoring every moment. There was only one thing left to do. I could run forever, or I could make my last stand here, end it on my own terms. I reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a flare gun. It was a desperate plan, but if I could get it close enough, maybe I'd have a chance. Fire had a way of hurting even the oldest of things, and if I could burn it, maybe I could take it down with me. The moon was high, casting a cold light over the road as I stepped out of the truck. The silence was thick, pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel it out there, the weight of its gaze like a chill crawling up my spine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I walked into the empty road, the flare gun heavy in my hand. "All right," I shouted, voice echoing in the stillness. "I'm here. Come and get me." For a long moment, nothing happened. The world remained still, silent, as if holding its breath. Then, slowly, the shadows began to shift. A figure appeared at the edge of the road, tall and skeletal, limbs too long, body twisted and wrong in ways my mind couldn't fully comprehend. It moved with a fluid grace, eyes gleaming black, hollow and hungry, like twin voids that stared straight into my soul. The creature watched me, a grin spreading across its face as it stepped forward. Its voice echoed through the night, low and mocking. "Brave, aren't we, little hunter?" I raised the flare gun, aiming straight at its chest. "Brave enough." It chuckled, the sound sending a shiver through me. "You can run, you can fight, but you cannot escape me. I am your end, the last thing you will ever see." I fired the flare, the bright red light slicing through the darkness as it hit the creature square in the chest. For a moment, it stumbled, the flames spreading across its skin, filling the air with the smell of burning flesh. The creature screamed, a sound of pure rage and agony, its form twisting and writhing as it clawed at the flames. I watched, heart pounding, as the fire licked up its body, consuming it inch by inch. But even as it burned, it didn't retreat. It staggered forward, eyes blazing with a fury that went beyond anything human. And then, impossibly, it began to laugh, a hollow, rasping sound that cut through the night like a blade. "You think that fire will stop me?" it hissed, voice crackling with pain and defiance. "I am beyond death. I am older than flame, older than fear." My hands shook as I backed away, the flare gun falling from my grip. It kept coming, even as the fire continued to eat away at it, flesh melting and reforming, a nightmarish vision of something that refused to die. With a final, desperate move, I pulled out the iron knife, gripping it tightly as I prepared to make my last stand. The creature lunged, moving with a speed that defied reason, and I braced myself, raising the knife. But instead of striking, it stopped, staring at the blade with something like amusement. "Your toys cannot hurt me, hunter," it whispered, voice soft and mocking. "But I will give you one last chance to run. Make it good." I stood there, knife in hand, the weight of its words pressing down on me. I knew then that this wasn't a hunt. It never had been. It was just one more challenge, one more game for a creature that existed beyond the bounds of life and death. It wanted me to run. It wanted to chase, to savor the fear that drove me. But I was done running. With a surge of determination, I lunged, driving the knife into its chest with every ounce of strength I had left. The creature screamed, a sound of pure fury, as the iron sank deep, its body convulsing as dark blood poured from the wound. For a moment, I thought I'd done it. I thought I'd finally stopped it. But then it grinned, that awful, twisted smile, even as the blood spilled down its chest. "Goodbye, hunter," it whispered, voice soft and terrible. And then it struck, its claws sinking into my shoulder, ripping through flesh and bone. Pain exploded through me, blinding and all-consuming, as the world faded into darkness.